For years, Jack Carter got away with mocking women who didn't play along. He saw Maya Ellison, a black congresswoman from Houston, and assumed she'd be another easy punchline on late-night television. He called her spicy, tried to paint her as angry, dramatic, a caricature. But when they picked Maya, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know she was a seasoned public defender, a policy strategist, and a woman who'd spent her entire life being underestimated and never backing down. What came next wasn't just justice, it was a shift in the room, a reckoning caught on camera. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one woman, it's about all of us. Sunlight filtered through the studio rafters as the band fell silent, the laughter died down, and millions of viewers leaned in closer to their screens. Across from Jack Carter, Maya Ellison didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She just spoke. And the air changed. What followed was a masterclass in dignity, clarity, and how one sentence, delivered calmly, can shake a nation awake. The lights in the studio buzzed with artificial energy, that particular blend of showbiz sparkle and hidden nerves. When Maya Ellison, congresswoman from the south side of Houston, stepped onto the stage of the late hour with Jack Carter, she walked like someone who'd been here before, even though it was her first time. In black heels and a deep burgundy blazer, she moved with elegance that didn't ask for attention, but refused to be ignored. Jack Carter, ever the smug ringmaster of late-night satire, greeted her with the usual cocktail of charm and condescension. "Give it up for the firecracker from Texas," he beamed, nudging the crowd into cheers. Or should I say, the woman who turns every committee hearing into a courtroom drama. Maya smiled, thin, practiced, polite. She took her seat and crossed her legs slowly like she was drawing a boundary. "Call me Maya," she said, voice smooth as low tide. "But I don't explode. I illuminate." A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd, but it wasn't joy. It was uncertainty. That moment, the first of many, shifted the air. Jack leaned back, amused. "You've got a little spice to you," he said, smirking. "Tell me, do you wake up every morning ready to fight, or is that just a side effect of being on Capitol Hill?" That word, spice, hung there like smoke from a match just lit. Maya didn't blink. She reached for her water, sipped, set it down with grace. "I'll answer that," she said. "But first, Jack, do you ever get tired of white men calling you brave just for interrupting people?" Silence. Heavy and immediate. Not the kind that follows a punchline. The kind that asks everyone in the room, "Did you hear that? Are you listening now?" Jack's grin faded just enough to reveal the edge of discomfort. The band didn't play. The audience didn't know whether to gasp or applaud. And Maya, she didn't move. She just held the space, steady as a flame in windless air. How many times in your own life have you watched someone diminish you with a smile and expected you to play along? This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was something else. Something deeper, rawer, a moment when the show cracked open and truth slipped through. The tension didn't dissolve. It settled, like dust in sunlight, visible now because someone had dared to stir the air. Jack shuffled his cue cards, the rhythm of the show slipping from his fingers like a dropped beat. He chuckled nervously, reaching for recovery. "Okay," he said. "I walked into that one." Maya tilted her head slightly. "No," she replied, still calm, still poised. "You ran." Laughter came, but it was different now. Uneasy, like people laughing not at a joke, but at their own discomfort. Jack glanced toward his producer just off stage, as if silently pleading for a lifeline. But this wasn't a crisis that could be solved with a commercial break or a clever one-liner. "You've been called bold," Jack tried, voice thinner now. "Others say angry. How do you define it?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I call it truthful," she said. There was no flourish, no dramatic pause. Just a word, heavy enough to tilt the room on its axis. Jack's smile froze. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The cameras kept rolling. The audience leaned in, not for entertainment anymore, but for understanding. They were witnessing something unscripted, rare. And then Jack reached again, this time with a clip cued on screen. We've got a video of one of your, let's say, more intense moments. No, Maya interrupted. Her voice stayed soft. Don't show a clip of me unless you're showing everyone else losing their temper. Otherwise, you're not showing the truth. You're selling a version. A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Somewhere, someone clapped once, then stopped. Respect doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it lands in silence. Have you ever felt your words finally land, not like stones but like seeds? Jack stared, blinking more than before. He looked like a man realizing the stage wasn't his alone anymore. Maya sat back, folding her hands in her lap, unmoved, unafraid, in control not because she shouted, but because she didn't need to. And just like that, the interview was no longer a performance. It was a reckoning. Jack Carter was used to rhythm. He'd danced through hundreds of interviews, dodging, teasing, deflecting with a smile and a punchline. But tonight, the rhythm had changed, and Maya Ellison wasn't dancing. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't rolled her eyes. She hadn't leaned forward like she was ready to pounce. What she had done was far more disruptive. She'd remained still. Jack tried again. You've been in some heated exchanges. Surely you admit it gets a little fiery sometimes. Maya's voice came like a still lake, hiding depth beneath the surface. You ever ask that to Senator Claiborne? She asked. Or is being heated only a problem when it's a woman? The audience didn't laugh, they held their breath, because the truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't need volume, it needs space. Jack blinked. His hand twitched at the cue cards again, as if hoping the answers might rearrange themselves. Well, I think we have a clip. Don't, Maya said, still not blinking. Don't play a clip of me unless you're playing everyone else's too, because if not, you're not being honest. You're being selective. A wave of quiet washed across the studio. This wasn't rebellion, it was refinement. This was a woman reclaiming the narrative, not by force, but by presence. How often do we mistake silence for weakness, when in fact it is the deepest form of control? Jack exhaled, slower now. The grin was gone, replaced by something closer to humility. Or maybe recognition. I wasn't trying to. He began. I know, Maya said, softening, just slightly. But you were, and that's the difference. No spotlight chased her words, no dramatic music cued, but something real had happened, something more lasting than applause. She had drawn the line, not with a raised voice, but with unshakable calm. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching, the most powerful people in the room are often the ones who don't need to raise their voices to be heard. By the time Maya Ellison stepped off the stage and disappeared into the velvet-lined hallway behind the studio, the world outside had already begun to catch fire. And started with a phone-recorded clip, a grainy video posted by someone in the third row, captioned, "She didn't even raise her voice." Within 30 minutes it had hit 50,000 views. An hour later it was 6 figures. By morning it was global. Every platform ignited. TikTok edits with dramatic scores. Reaction videos dissecting her tone, her posture, the precision of her words. One creator looped her line, "Maybe that's not my problem, maybe that's yours," over a slow-motion zoom with the caption, "Grace under pressure is the loudest power." And yet, it wasn't the virality that defined the moment. It was the tone of the conversation. This wasn't just about politics. It was about power, language, labels. Cable news anchors debated it, talk shows weighed in. Some called her brave, others labeled her too sharp. Conservative pundits weaponized the moment, painting her as yet another angry woman refusing to play nice. But those who listened closely knew better. Maya hadn't been angry. She had been uncompromising. Because what does it say when calm clarity is interpreted as aggression? Have you ever been called difficult when all you did was speak your truth without apology? Even people who didn't normally follow politics were talking. In church groups, in office kitchens, on school boards. It had become more than a clip. It had become a mirror. Maya, for her part, said nothing. No tweets, no follow-up interviews. When asked by her team if she wanted to issue a statement, she simply replied, "I already did." That silence spoke volumes. It reminded people that real strength doesn't always follow up. Sometimes it just lets the truth echo. And echoes, when powerful enough, don't fade. They expand. Before the lights in the headlines, before the viral clips and studio applause, there was a little girl in South Acres, Houston, sitting in the back of a crowded classroom with her hand raised too often. Maya Ellison had questions, always. Why were the history books torn and missing pages? Why did no one teach about people who looked like her? Why, when she challenged the rules, did the teachers call her disruptive instead of curious? Her mother, a night shift nurse at St. Joseph's, slept through the day to keep food on the table. Her father, who ran a local auto shop, worked 7 days a week and came home with grease under his fingernails and silence in his eyes. They didn't talk much about dreams, but they showed her grit. Maya learned young how to hold her ground in small spaces. On buses where drivers skipped her stop, in offices where her voice was corrected before it was heard. She wasn't loud, not yet, but she was precise. She learned how to ask the kind of questions that didn't just poke, they peeled. At Prairie View A&M, she studied political science and worked tech support on weekends. She debated students who had prep school polish and family legacies. She didn't have either. What she had was fire, not the kind that raged, but the kind that endured. She lost often, but she learned faster. Later, in law school, the rooms got colder and the ceilings lower. She worked in public defense, standing beside clients whose names were mispronounced and whose stories were dismissed before the first word was spoken. Maya stayed late, filing motions in courtrooms that didn't care for nuance. Have you ever felt the need to be twice as good, only to be told you're twice as difficult? Every time she was told to soften, to smile more, to play the game, Maya remembered. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to be heard. And when she sat across from Jack Carter on national television, that fire didn't explode. It glowed, steady and unwavering, fueled by every room she had once been told she didn't belong in. They had labeled her long before they ever heard her speak. Too bold, too sharp, too much. But Maya Ellison never tried to shrink to fit their comfort. That night on the late hour, she wasn't trying to prove she belonged. She was proving she never needed permission in the first place. As the internet dissected her every word, Maya stayed silent. No Instagram post, no interview tour. She wasn't performing for applause or aiming for a viral crown. What she had done, what she always did, was show up in full. Jack Carter, now visibly more measured, tried to bring the tone back to levity. "What's something people always get wrong about you?" he asked, reaching for safety. "That I came here to play nice," Maya said, her smile soft but unshaken. The crowd laughed, this time not out of obligation, but out of release, because honesty, when it's that crisp, doesn't need embellishment. Jack nodded slowly, still recovering. "I may not agree with everything you say," he admitted, "but I definitely wouldn't want to debate you without a lifeline and 3 assistants." The room broke into laughter, into something lighter. Even Maya laughed for real. But the shift that had occurred earlier hadn't faded. It simply sat beneath the surface now, like the deep part of a current, steady and unseen. How many times have you been told to soften your edges, when those edges are what made you survive? In the final moments, they spoke about legislation, about community mental health funding, about kids in schools who never get the chance to ask why. But even in those safer topics, the ripple from that earlier exchange stayed. You could feel it. Because Maya hadn't won a debate, she'd redefined the terms. She hadn't raised her voice, she'd claimed her space. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that real presence doesn't ask for permission. It simply is. 3 days after the broadcast, the buzz had quieted. But not inside the Elwood studios where the late hour filmed. Producers moved like chess pieces behind curtains, already focused on the next guest, the next joke, the next viral moment. But in one hallway, lined with dressing rooms and dim track lighting, something unexpected was about to unfold. Maya Ellison wasn't there to make a second appearance. She had been invited for a private meeting about a civic initiative, media literacy programs in underserved schools. It was supposed to be low-key, off the record, quiet. But fate has a strange sense of timing. Jack Carter was in that same hallway, prepping for his next taping, his trademark cue cards clutched like a shield. He spotted Maya first. For a second, he froze. Then, as if gravity pulled him forward, he walked toward her. "Hey," he said, a voice softer than anything the audience had heard from him. Maya turned, calm, present. "Hey, I've been thinking about what you said," Jack added. "That night, it got me. I think I got too comfortable, forgot that being funny doesn't excuse being careless." She studied him for a breath. "You're not the first," she said. "You won't be the last." Jack nodded, but his eyes didn't wander. "I know, but I don't want to be either." There it was, the moment without the stage lights, without the band, just two people, face to face. Have you ever witnessed someone drop their defenses? Not because they were forced, but because they chose growth over pride? Maya's gaze softened, not in concession, but in recognition. "Then don't be," she said. Jack exhaled, like he hadn't realized he was holding air in his lungs. "Thank you for not torching me." She smirked. "I don't torch," she said. "I clarify." There was no applause, no hashtags, but what happened there mattered, because real change doesn't always arrive in a soundbite. Sometimes it starts in silence, in eye contact, in the space between defensiveness and accountability. 2 weeks after the night she turned a late show upside down with a single question, Maya Ellison stood at the front of a modest high school auditorium in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The folding chairs creaked under teenage restlessness. The stage lights were dim, the mic slightly scratchy, but Maya was radiant in her simplicity. No blazer, no cameras, just her and a room full of questions waiting to be asked. A girl in the third row, braids tied back with blue ribbon, voice trembling, raised her hand. "How do you stay calm," she asked, "when people try to make you small?" The room went still. Maya didn't rush her answer. She took a slow breath, like she was reaching for something deeper than a soundbite. "You don't give them the power to define you," she said. "And you remember, there's nothing louder than grace." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breath caught, of hearts held, of something sacred being passed hand to hand. That line ended up printed in a school newsletter. A teacher pinned it on a corkboard in a classroom that had never once had a quote from a living black woman on the wall. But the sentence was more than wise. It was earned. It carried with it every courtroom Maya had walked into, every label she'd peeled off. Every time someone tried to stuff her into a version of herself they found easier to digest. Have you ever heard a single sentence that made you rethink the way you see yourself and the way the world sees you? Maya didn't set out to be a headline. She didn't rehearse that moment on Jack Carter's show, but when it came, she met it with everything she was. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her narrative, she rewrote the rules for how power can sound. Not loud, not soft, just clear. And sometimes, clarity is what echoes the longest. Life doesn't always ask us to raise our voice. It asks us to raise our presence. In a world that often rewards the loudest person in the room, there's something deeply powerful about staying steady, calm, and true to yourself. Maya Ellison reminded us that dignity doesn't need to shout. It listens, it holds its ground, and when spoken with clarity, even a quiet voice can shift the room. Many of us have lived long enough to know what it feels like to be dismissed, misunderstood, or asked to be smaller just to make others comfortable. But grace, when chosen over anger, can become its own kind of strength. It doesn't mean we stay silent. It means we speak with purpose, not for applause, but for truth. No matter your age, your title, or the room you're in, your presence matters. Your story matters. And sometimes, the most lasting change comes not from fighting harder, but from standing still and letting the truth speak for itself. So the next time someone tries to define you, pause, breathe, and remember, you don't need to prove your worth to anyone who can't see it. You only need to remember it for yourself. It wasn't applause that marked the end. It was the stillness after. Maya Ellison walked out of that studio with her head high, not because she had won an argument, but because she never let the world shrink her spirit. That's quiet power. The kind that doesn't beg to be seen, but can't be ignored. In the days that followed, conversations changed. In classrooms, on talk shows, around kitchen tables, people began to ask different questions about fairness, about labels, about how often we silence those who refuse to be softened. Maya didn't just reclaim her own voice, she made space for others to do the same. That's how change begins. Not with noise, but with courage repeated, echoed, and remembered. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.